Good morning, or hello and welcome to the annual II Graduate Student Lightning Talks. I would like to give a special welcome to our prospective students joining today as part of the MIRS virtual campus visit. It's my hope that this event will offer you an insightful look at what students actually do as part of our program and helps to illustrate the breadth of experiences across MIRS. As you know, my name is Cassel. I'm an historian of modern China, and I'm the Director of Graduate Studies in the LSNA International Institute. I have interacted with a student in today's panel, either in my capacity as academic advisor or a director of the program, or both. And I'm very impressed with the work that they've done on their capstone projects. In addition to our visiting students, I'd like to thank the faculty, staff, and students from the various II centers who are here to show support for our students and colleagues. One of the strengths of MIRS is the opportunity to grow connections and collaborations across the II, and your participation in events like this are a significant part of how we can accomplish this. We have 5 exceptional students eager to share about their research and educational journeys, but first I would like to go over a few housekeeping points. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be shared via the II YouTube page. I ask that attendees keep your microphones muted throughout today's program to minimize any disruptions for our presenters. After each speaker, we will have time for you to ask questions. Feel free to write your questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and we will address them all at once. Or if you prefer, once we start the Q&A, I will invite you to use the raise hand feature, and we will call on people to ask your question directly to the presenter. With that, I think we're ready to move on to the main event, our student speakers. Our first speaker this afternoon is Rosa Razmi. Rosa is a first-year student in the Middle Eastern and North African Studies specialization and is also pursuing a graduate certificate in museum studies. Her research interests include contemporary Iranian studies, diaspora studies, citizenship, women's rights, public health, and social activism. She is a recipient of multiple MIRS and CMANUS fellowships and most recently was named a FLAS Fellow for the upcoming academic year. Additionally, Rosa contributes to the leadership and administration of the MIRS program, serving as a MIRS graduate student assistant representing our first-year cohort. Please join me in welcoming Rosa for a talk titled The Daughters of Diaspora and the Generational Impacts of the Iranian Revolution.
Thank you, Dr. Cassel, for the very kind introduction. So hi, everyone. If you see me looking off to the side, by the way, I have my notes on a second monitor, so just so you all know that. My name is Rosa Razmi. I am a first-year MIRS student with a concentration in Middle Eastern and North African Studies. So right now I am working on my master's thesis that I have begun to call The Daughters of Diaspora and the Generational Impacts of the Iranian Revolution. So in this project, I focus on the generational dimension of the diaspora following the burst of migration after the Iranian Revolution. We can go to the next slide. So my primary research question is, what is the impact of the Iranian Revolution on diasporic Iranian women and their daughters? So the Iranian Revolution, or the Islamic Revolution, occurred in 1979, and the revolution is the most significant critical juncture in Iranian history that has caused many Iranians to migrate or leave in exile. And this is whether it's directly or indirectly related to the revolution itself. So this research project focuses on the impact of the Iranian Revolution on diasporic Iranian women who migrated to the United States, specifically their daughters, and their relationships with their national, ethnic, and religious identities. We can go ahead to the next slide. So I've crafted what I have defined as guiding questions. They're not necessarily my follow-up research questions, but this is kind of to show you my thought process to getting to my 2 primary ones, which is the one I just discussed and the last one shown on the screen. So the first one is, why did these women leave Iran after the revolution? These 3 subcategories that I've included are social, political, and economic reasons. This is to show that there are many different reasons for migration. What I'm hypothesizing is that there's a pattern tied back to the revolution itself through these categories. The next question is, what are the generational impacts and how has this affected their daughters? So I believe now that we are getting to a point where these conversations between mothers and daughters of the Iranian diaspora are becoming more common. This is an age range I would consider not as highly studied, which I think brings more value to the conversation. I'm kind of speaking from my own personal experience. This is a very personal research project, as like the topic very much applies to me myself. So I believe now that like as daughters around my age and older are now kind of more equipped to talk about these issues at hand. So overall, though, I'll be asking throughout my research, how has this shaped their ethnic, national, and religious identities? I'll discuss my demographics more specifically later on, but I believe that the diaspora has led Iranian women's identities to shift in ways that reflect critical historical moments that can be analyzed, and this is both in the United States context and the Iranian context. We can go ahead to the next slide. So one of the primary things that we've been focusing on in this year's research design course is how our research is relevant and how are we contributing to our fields of research. I've included here some of the current events in Iran as part of the relevance for this project because this project is inherently gendered. So this research will bleed into what's happening with the current uprisings in Iran following Mahsa Amini's death. But also I wanted to focus on how I'm expanding on the current diasporic literature. So there's limited Iranian diasporic literature available that covers the generational aspect of the diaspora. The second generation Iranian Americans are now reaching an age where they have the tools to discuss these issues at hand, kind of like I talked about earlier. A lot of the literature itself that's available right now too focuses on poetry and prose, so this is kind of taking a different approach that will either substantiate the claims that are analyzed through those pieces, or it'll say this is what the firsthand accounts via interview communication will show us. And we can go to the next slide. So for my tentative structure for this master's project, since I am in the really early stages here as a first year, I wanted to focus on the historical context section. So I'm emphasizing the Pahlavi era and the Iranian Revolution itself within my historical context because they are two drastically different points of history for Iranian women. Within the Pahlavi era, Iran underwent rapid westernization as an effort to modernize. So, however, the Shah's regime was still an authoritarian regime as it silenced any dissent from the Iranian people who wanted to emphasize Iran's greatness without colonial influence. The Iranian Revolution, therefore, was highly supported by Iranian women, as captured in the second picture here. The first picture here showcases the influence of the West on the Shah as women became a way to message the reforms that were being influenced with Western influence. The Islamic Republic then used women as the sort of tool for their severe Islamification in response once the Shah was overthrown. The complexity is important to note when asking my participants to look back. So this background will contextualize their answers when writing up the data. I also wanted to include how I'm considering including materials that will cover Prime Minister Mossadegh's initiatives as a democratically elected leader in Iran in 1953, who was ousted in August 1953 in a coup conducted by the CIA. So I'm kind of weighing the pros and cons right now, but since I am in the early stages, I think it's important to know and important to emphasize our research is always changing as you're interacting with the literature and conducting the fieldwork. That's something I'm very comfortable with and something I want to encourage everyone to be comfortable with when they begin this program. So we can go ahead to the next slide as well. So therefore, my planned approach and methods is to conduct interviews that will be substantiated by my historical context. I plan to conduct these interviews with Iranian women who immigrated to the United States between the 1980s and 2000s. Then I will conduct interviews with the second generation of Iranian American women. This has been kind of reframed a little bit. I had a different original plan, but I've been kind of interacting with some faculty and some advisors to kind of guide me. So I've reframed my demographics this way to have greater access to participants through my own connections and connections of my advisor. And right now we're working on narrowing my range of participants even more and choosing what location of the diaspora to focus on here in the United States. We can go ahead to the next slide. So what is an oral history interview? An oral history interview is an interview that moves chronologically through the respondent's life to avoid the participants from creating a linear narrative with their experiences, instead moving from time period to time period. This will benefit my research because it will allow me to gauge the differing opinions of generations with the timeline from their own account. Excuse me, sorry about that. This will fit into the historical perspective and the different accounts of the diaspora recorded in popular media. I learned this method from a colloquium event that I had attended as a part of this first-year degree requirement, titled Impossible Futures: Why Women Leave American Muslim Communities While Men Stay. This was by the University of Chicago's Dr. Amen Abdelhadi, who explained why Muslim communities in the United States retain men but lose women as expressed by American Muslims. Excuse me for 1 second. So through this, she traced how central Muslims were to her subjects and their social lives. This is something I just kind of considered because we're studying similar groups and themes. We can go ahead to the next slide. So I just want to focus here on this bibliography that I've been granted access to for my sources. So Dr. Kamran Amin from the Dearborn campus gave me access to this amazing bibliography that has 50 pages of sources on the Iranian diaspora. It's going to be super useful as I'm kind of conducting literature over the summer and next semester. And I can use it to my advantage, and I can go ahead and wrap up with the next slide. So again, I'm focusing on the impact of the Iranian Revolution on diasporic Iranian women, their daughters, and their relationships with their national, ethnic, and religious identities following critical historical movements of Iran's recent histories. Thank you all for listening, and sorry for my little coughing fit. I'm a little sick at the moment.
Okay, I hope you're okay with your throat. So I just want to say that I'm happy that you brought up the colloquium, that one of the colloquium events that you attended inspired you in the research. I think that shows how the different parts of the program fit together. So the floor is open for questions and answers. If anyone wants to type an answer in the comment section or in the chat, or raise their hand, they can do so. Okay, we have Emma Carson. You have a question.
Hi. So this semester, I'm actually pivoting away from what I'm most interested in, which is the Balkans, and I'm preparing a presentation on the memoir Reading Lolita in Tehran, and using that in conversation with recent protests in Iran, and just looking at the literature and sort of in relation to current events. And so that's been really interesting. And you said that you are shifting away from more commonly like used prose and like poetry. And I guess my question is, have you still found it useful to engage in literature, or is that not really as much of an interest of yours?
That's a really good question. So actually, I've been engaging with literature a lot, I'm at the graduate level of Farsi, so I've taken poetry and prose classes. And I think it's really useful to look at. I would advise Lolita in Tehran has some of its own issues that scholars have critiqued that I would advise looking into, but I think it's really useful. I just kind of want to conduct interviews because that's just where my personal passion lies. And I also think there's something useful that comes with that interaction and coding that data through qualitative methods.
Thank you.
Any other questions, or are you at the end of your voice?
I'm so sorry. I really don't know what has just happened.
No, it happens. It happened to me many times when I'm giving a talk. So are there any more questions? Or shall we move on to the next presenter? Basma Arshad has a question.
Yes, okay. Hello, Rosa. This looks very great. I'm very excited to see where your research is going to lead you. You've mentioned that your focus is on mother-daughter relationships. I wanted to ask if father-son dynamics or other family dynamics within studies of the Iranian diaspora are more commonly studied, and what new patterns or subjects do you think you're going to discover by focusing on just mother-daughter relationships?
Thank you, Basma. So I kind of again, I speak to my own experience. These are conversations that I'm having with my own mom. They're very similar to what I can engage with and see. I think because of the way women have been used as a political tool in Iran, that's why I've kind of had this gendered aspect. I've also just done a lot of gendered scholarship in the past. But it is something I've definitely considered interacting with sons as well. And maybe in a PhD setting or another setting, I'll expand that research. But I think there's something useful in both. I think that it would be a great opportunity for someone else to kind of tackle that while I tackle this, or something to expand upon in the future.
Okay, thank you. So I think that in the interest of time and also preserving your voice, we should move on to the next presenter. So I'm just going to move on and introduce our next speaker, who is Joe Cacese, a second-year student in the Chinese Studies specialization. His research centers on propaganda and ideology in early modern China. Throughout his time at Michigan, Joe has received several awards, including Academic Year and Summer Flash Fellowships in 2021 and 2022, the David He and Isabel Sun Fellowship for 2021 through 2022, and the Huayu Best Scholarship for Advanced Language Training at the National Taiwan University. Please join me in welcoming Joe for this presentation.
Thanks, Dr. Cassel. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for listening to my talk. I'm currently a second-year student in the Chinese Studies program with LRCCS. Charlie, can go to the next slide. My presentation is maybe going to pivot a little bit from Rosa's. Instead of just talking about my research, I'm going to talk about my experiences with funding and the opportunities I had while here in Michigan. But for just a little bit about my research, I studied the Republican period of Chinese history, specifically 1934 to 1937, and the Nanjing decade more broadly, right before the Sino-Japanese War breaks out. And I've had a lot of great access to archives that have been digitalized. Super convenient, especially in this day and age when you don't know if you're going to be able to go overseas whenever the next pandemic breaks out or geopolitical crisis. So it's been really helpful to have those resources available. There's a lot of rare collections. So yeah, you have a lot of research opportunities while you're here. And a lot of opportunities and funding available to present research or attend conferences. I just got done attending the AAS, Association for Asian Studies conference in Boston last weekend. I'll talk about that a little more later. And there's a lot of, people here, professors who are doing really unique research. They're very helpful. It's a very kind environment. My thesis took an unexpected turn at one point, and I had to look up some things about Buddhist studies. And we have Don Lopez here. Great resource, helped me, no problems. Charlie, you can go to the next slide. Yeah, so I got the 2021 summer class, which was super helpful. I took a year off in between my undergraduate and returning back to school. So it was a great way to restart school with language training. I had an online intensive Mandarin course. I had been awarded rather late, and then I wasn't already a student, so there wasn't a lot of programs available, but you can use it for private tutoring sessions, which I did. And I had one-on-one courses for 140 hours throughout the summer. So it really helped bring my Chinese level back to where it needed to be for graduate school after having that break. And then I again received the 2022 summer class, in which I participated in the Tsinghua IUP program. It was online that year because we weren't able to get into China, but that's Tsinghua Beijing. And the program, I think, is only available to a few colleges in North America, and Michigan's one of them. It was a fantastic program. Even though it was online, I still enjoyed it, and it really helped a lot. And then, of course, I had continued language instruction and funding with the academic year class this past year, which was very generous this year, actually. The stipend was increased a fair bit. So that was great. And then this summer, I will be attending some more advanced Chinese studies at Tsinghua University and National Tsinghua University in Taiwan in Hsinchu. That will be in person. And that is through the Huayu Best Scholarship, which also I think is only available to a few select universities across North America. Of course, Michigan is one of them as well. And, you know, I am technically graduating in April, but the program was able to you know, extend my graduation date so that I could attend this program. So it's definitely very, very lax in that respect. If you have the opportunities, you are able to take them. You can go to the next slide. And then just to talk about my internship experience a little bit. So I'm currently interning with the AAS. Again, that's the Association for Asian Studies. It's the largest Asian Studies association in North America. It's paid, which is always good for internships. You can never guarantee that. And then, yeah, so I attended the Boston conference where I was working part-time for it, but also had enough time to attend panels and sessions and the exhibitions and everything. And it was paid for. I, of course, got some of it paid for by my work, but we also had funds available through LRCCS to cover some of the travel expenses for that as well. And I guess it was also an added bonus that St. Patrick's was going on the same weekend, so that was pretty cool. But yeah, there's a lot of great networking opportunities. You know, I got to see a lot of cool things, meet a lot of new people that I wanted to meet. You know, if you ever read that professor that you've been reading all of his works and never met him, may get the chance to actually meet them in person in real life instead of just through their own works. So yeah, it was really great. And I'm still interning there, and the people there are super awesome. So I know there's a lot of other internship opportunities, TAing and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities here that you can have work. Yeah. Go to the next slide. And it's just like a finishing slide. Thank you for listening. I think that went a little more quicker than it should, but I'm definitely welcome to take some questions from anyone who's wondering.
Right. I also attended AS in Boston, and I saw you everywhere. So it must have been a very productive experience. And I it's a great opportunity to meet with prominent Asian studies scholar. So do we have any questions for Joe? You can either type them in the chat room, or you can raise your hand using the raise your hand function at the lower right corner. Okay, I think it's Kenna Kump.
Yeah, I was just wondering, is the AAS aimed specifically at a certain region of Asia, like East Asia, or is it Asia in general?
So it's Asia in general. There was a fair amount of conferences and panels for like South Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia. So they break it down into regions. And I would say that, of course, East Asia is definitely the most prominent. But there are things for even like the Middle East. And yeah, so they break it down into different regions, and it pretty much covers all of Asia as a geographic unit.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Other questions? So one thing, I mean, are you working with the AAS here in Ann Arbor? Because this is where they're headquartered, correct?
Yeah. So that's what makes this also probably a really unique opportunity for Asian scholars, is the fact that AAS is headquartered here in Ann Arbor. It's not too far away, and there's actually a bus stop near it. If like you need to get there, I have my car, but it's really convenient to get to through public transportation as well. So yeah, that's an added bonus of being here in Ann Arbor.
Yes, and that goes back several decades. Several of our faculty in the history department and other departments have been chairing the Association of Asian Studies. I think most recently Mini Sinha, who is active in the Southeast Asia and in the South Asia cluster, was recently the chairperson, the director of the AS. So there is this is an indication of how central the University of Michigan has been to Asian studies throughout nationally. Other questions or comments? If not, we always need time. So thank you very much, Joe and Rosa. We're going to move on to Liangyuan Zeng. Are you with us, Liangyuan?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yes. Okay. The mic is yours.
So thank you, Dr. Cassel. And I would say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So I'm Liangyuan. I'm now a first-year master student in the MIRS program, and I'm specializing in Chinese studies. So today I'm very happy.
Sorry, I forgot to introduce you. I feel really bad. Sorry, this was going. Can I just interrupt to give you a formal introduction, just like everybody else? I sincerely apologize. So it's now we're going to hear from Liangyuan Zeng, who is a first-year student in the Chinese specialization. He's interested in historical political economy, insurgency, and counterinsurgency. He was named a 2022 fellow of the Weiser Center for Emerging Democracies and is a recipient of the Lieberthal-Rogel Endowment Fellowships. And please join me in welcoming him for his talk titled "The Politics of Counterinsurgency." My sincere apologies for skipping this step.
So thank you again, Dr. Cassel. And I'm very happy to discuss my ongoing thesis project entitled "The Politics of Counterinsurgency." Please go ahead to the next slide. So I study political science, and I am particularly interested in the topic of insurgency, counterinsurgency, and civil war. But what is a little bit different is that I do research mostly in a historical context, and I use quantitative methods to examine the past. So this approach, also known as the historical political economy, uses historical settings to generate or test social science theories. So in my thesis project, I try to explain the variation of counterinsurgency strategies. In particular, I focus on how internal elite dynamics shape external military decisions. In historical cases, not only provide a suitable context for this project, but also contain many potential data sources. So please go ahead to the next slide. So in my thesis project, I argue that a fractionalized military force will make the political leader worry about coup attempts initiated by rival factions within the military. So at this point, counterinsurgency warfare, in fact, provides an opportunity for the leader. And the leader can actually leverage the power of insurgents to weaken these rival military factions. So to do that, political leaders can strategically deploying their troops, deciding when and where to send different types of forces. To test my theory, I chose the National Revolutionary Army, a fractionalized military force, as my case of interest. And the war between the Chinese Kuomintang and the Communist Party of China from 1927 to 1936 provides a good opportunity to test my arguments. So in particular, I want to investigate how did the leader of the KMT deploy his loyalists and disloyalists during the battle. Please go ahead to the next slide. So based on our archives compiled by Chinese historians, I constructed a unique data set covering more than 500 NRA divisions from 1928 to 1950 with their time and location of deployment. So you can see an example of the original data on the right figure. And I also collect KMT General's diary and memorials. So please go ahead to the next slide. So here are some preliminary analysis results. So the figure on the left-hand side shows where were these NRA troops deployed into the counterinsurgency warfare. And I think it's very clear to see that the Central Army, which was the KMT's loyal forces, were deployed later than these non-central armies. And the figure on the right-hand side shows some statistical results. And we can see the divisions from rival political factions were more likely to be deployed on average 14 months earlier than these central forces. So I'm still developing this project, and I'm going back to China to do some archival research and to gather more data resources to further test these arguments. Please go ahead to the next slide. So I want to do some quick summaries. So I want to say that the MIRS program is highly interdisciplinary, which helps to develop an interdisciplinary research project. So in my case, I'm doing political science in a historical context, so I can take courses both from the political science department, history department, or other departments with the information I need. So our course selection is highly flexible. And you can also attend workshops organized by different departments to present your research and receive feedbacks. And the LRCCS, the International Institute, and the university also provide many resources for conducting research. And we have a very wonderful Asia library. From the library, I got these native Chinese historians' documents and their compiled volumes to support my research. And we also have a nice summer research travel grant. And finally, I think we have very supportive faculty and staff members helping students to explore more possibilities and potentials of the research. So I hope everyone could come to the MIRS program and enjoy your study in the MIRS program. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think there is a final slide. Yeah.
Oh, the final slide. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm messing
yeah.
today.
Yeah, and please feel to email me if you have any questions.
So yeah, it's just interesting topic. I just bought the Alexander Pantsov's new Chiang Kai-shek biography based on archival research, which may be of interest to your research. So do we have questions for Liangyuan, either in the chat room or through raising your hands? So I'm just gonna ask you a question, waiting for other questions. So are you intending to go to the Hoover Institution, where they've stored a lot of resources? I mean, Chiang Kai-shek's diary is there and might give you clues to his intentions in deploying loyalists versus disloyalists?
Yeah, actually, my next year's academic year fellowships proposal is generally focused on like a 1 week visit to the Hoover Institute, because the Chiang Kai-shek diary is a very important resource, can qualitatively supplement my theory. And it's important. I think it's very interesting to know like how Chiang Kai-shek actually think and perceive like different types of generals, divisions during that period. Yeah, I would definitely go to the Hoover Institute. Yeah, diary is a very difficult source to use. But yeah, so are there other questions for Liangyuan in the chat room or elsewhere? Through the raising of hands. No questions? Yeah, well, if there are no questions, I'm just going to move on to the next presenter. So thank you very much, Liangyuan. And I'm looking forward to talk to you about your project during office hours. So the next presenter is, give me a second, I need to check my notes here. Next speaker is Mohammad Khan. Mohammad is a first-year student in the South Asian Studies specialization and has been recognized as a 2-time FLAS Fellow for Advanced Study of Persian. He focuses on Islamic civilizations in South Asia, including the Timurid Mughal Empire, theories of historiography and historical writing, Islamic cultural histories and political violence in modern South Asia. Please join me in welcoming Mohammad for his talk titled The Battlefields of Indian History.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you're having a good morning, afternoon. I'd like to first start off by thanking the II by allowing me this opportunity to speak to you all about my tentative research title and projects that I've been conducting work on over for the past year and will continue to do so in the next year. My project right now is called The Battlefields of Indian History, Categorizing Hindutva Historiography of India During Muslim Rule. Could I have the next slide, please? So first, I'd like to take an opportunity to kind of complicate your relationships with history a little bit. Most of us encounter historical narratives and the discipline of history, usually in primary and secondary school, where history is often presented in a neat, coherent, fixed textbook narrative. I'd like to complicate that relationship a little bit by highlighting the work that historians actually do in generating those narratives you see in textbooks. Historians are often working with really fragmented, skewed, and biased data when they're sort of compiling their historical narratives. And often the nature of this data is in total disrepair. Actually, Dr. Cassel gave me a really good term to use when describing historical research, and it's the study of garbology. And a case in point, in my region of specialization is in India. On the right here, I have a picture from the Hindustan Times of an archive that is literally falling in disrepair due to environmental factors, lack of upkeep, and basically also just a sort of lack of consciousness when it comes to maintaining the integrity of the archives. So here I want to emphasize that because historical data by nature is so fragmented, it relies on a degree of narrativization and interpretation on the hand of the historian. So often this means that historical narratives can be challenged and they can be contested along ideological lines, as I will show in the case of India. Next slide, please. So in the case of India, we have a lot of examples in the current day of the modern Hindutva movement that is currently in power. And the Hindutva movement is often characterized as a right-wing Hindu extremist / nationalist movement. Many sort of attempts have been made by this movement to rewrite history. On the bottom right here, I have the example of the demolition of the Babri Mosque, which was a highly televised, highly internationalized events that occurred in the 80s and 90s, which led to the demolition of a mosque that was presumably built on, or allegedly built rather, on the site of the birth of the mythological Hindu figure of Lord Ram. This led to wide-scale protests and pogroms against Muslim communities and vice versa as well. So it was a very contested moment in Indian history. On the bottom left, I have examples of the erecting of statues by Shivaji Maharaj, who is a historical figure valorized by the Hindutva movement for his supposed opposition to Muslim rule in India. And on the top right, I have a RSS affiliate. The RSS is basically the organizational backbone to Hindutva. They're compiling a team to basically rewrite Indian history according to their particular ideological and religious lines. Next slide. So this is where my intervention comes in, and I'm asking, what descriptive and normative categories do Hindutva-affiliated historians construct in their historiography of Muslim presence in India? Next slide, please. So it's reasonable to ask here, why am I studying Muslim history in India? And why is that important in relation to Hindutva historiography or historical writing? So it's widely known at this point that Indian Muslims occupy a very precarious position in the current political status or landscape of India. And I posit that if history can be instrumentalized as a weapon or as a political tool, then particular demographics, Muslims in my case, can be a target of that instrumentalization. The demolition of the Babri Mosque is one example of the rise of a political machine that is ideologically determined to rewrite or write out Muslim history in India. This, coupled with the rise in hate crimes that have been occurring all across India against Muslim populations, shows that the current political sovereign, the current sort of political moment in India really rests on targeting Muslim minorities. And then finally, in the most recent and the most overt example of sort of the program of supremacy occurring in India is the Indian Citizenship Amendment of 2019, where Muslims were effectively barred from pathways to citizenship in the country. So all of these sort of hint at a particular narrative, a historiographical narrative that's emerging, where Muslims are consistently being branded as outsiders and invaders in India. They are seen as fundamentally exogenous to the Indian historical space. They don't have a part in it, and whatever part is allocated to them is one of enmity. It's one of hostility. Where does this logically lead is the question I pose to you. And this question really does highlight the sort of exigency of my project. Because if Muslims are seen as outsiders and invaders and not part of the Indian fold, then what does that mean about their presence in India? Hannah Arendt famously theorized in The Origins of Totalitarianism how particular tropes, particular narratives recur in fascistic discourses that lead to really upscaled events of violence. And as for the images here, from the East Asia Forum, I have some pictures of the protests that occurred in the wake of the Indian Citizenship Amendment Act. And in the bottom right, I actually have one example of one of the ways that Hindutva is really challenging Muslim histories in India by the act of renaming cities. So the name of this particular town is coded as Muslim, and it's been sort of renewed and in a more Hinduized name. So could I have the next slide, please? So as for empirics, where does my intervention exactly lie? So I'm tracking the sedimentation of Hindutva historiographical tropes in scholarly and public discourses. Just like any other sort of active narrative, the Hindutva historiographical narrative has its tropes. It has its sort of recurring motifs that we can sort of, in my theory at least, track and kind of analyze in that regard. So I begin with the chief ideologues of the RSS, who are often pointed to be V.D. Savarkar and M.D. Golwalkar, who have written extensive commentary on Indian history. And I expect to find the recurrence of a particular trope of the Muslim in their work on what Indian history should be. Then I look at the sedimentation of these tropes in the scholarship, both academic scholarship with academics, with works spurred on by or sponsored by the RSS, and also in public facing sort of scholarships like the media. And then I also like to see where this occurs in visual narratives, how this is visually communicated. Like, for example, through Shivaji monuments that have been arising in the wake of the Hindutva rise. And this is all towards developing a new periodization of historical narratives. India, as a case, is rife with historiographical debate. From the Marxist perspective to the colonial perspective, I think more attention, and there has certainly been more attention in recent years, should be directed towards a specific Hindutva historiographical moment and what narratives are arising in that context. So the next slide, please. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening and attending, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions and feedback on my work. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for the shout out of on garbology. So it's a Swedish political scientist, Michael Schonhausen, posting it in the chat room, who launched the term garbology using kind of garbage, so to speak, on flea markets in order to reconstruct narratives of the Cultural Revolution. And I'm happy that this concept can travel to South Asia and enrich discussions. But enough about that. Are there any questions for Mohammad? You can post it either in the chat room or you can raise your hand. Okay, I think it's Emma. Yes.
Hi, Mohammad. Thank you for your talk. I enjoyed hearing about your research. I don't know a lot about Indian history, so that's sort of out of my comfort zone. But one thing that did resonate with me was how you talked about like the narrative of history. And since I am not familiar with Indian history, maybe you can talk more generally about how you've interacted with that concept in your research, and how you came to identify that as an interest of yours.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a great question. So, the narrative of history, interestingly enough, sort of came to me from a more theoretical lens. So, through classes at the University of Michigan, I was exposed to new ideas, like new theoretical models, like the idea of discourse analysis and post-structuralist theory. And these sort of theoretical frameworks connect to Indian history in a strong way. So if you've ever have done any classes on post-colonialism, post-colonial theory, decolonization, you'll hear a lot about subaltern studies. And that's actually a paradigm that emerged out of Indian history and historiography. So the concept of subaltern is, how do we tell the histories of people who did not have a voice in the archive? So the archive typically privileges people who are able to write, people from political perspective or political positions in society, like the royalty or like the political elite. But what about the sort of underclass? What about the common person? And this is, trends in history itself reflect these discussions. So in the 50s and the 60s, there were turns in how history was written called new types of histories were developed, like social history, cultural history. And these histories really try to de-emphasize ideas of the sort of political imagination or the political supremacy, or the supremacy of political history, rather, that are often taken. So when it came to me, I noticed that the current Hindutva movement really is keen on the historical revisionism. They really are keen on demonizing Muslim presence in India. It's part of their rhetoric and part of why they rose to power. So I really was trying to seek ways to explore that. And that's where the narrative through line came in, that fundamentally, this isn't just a purely rhetorical exercise where Hindutva is like, okay, we don't like Muslims, so we're going to signal that in our rhetoric. But no, rather it's a rewriting of the historical narrative. So I guess this is all to wrap up that historical narrative and historiography, if you're considering being a historian or even an anthropologist or any other humanities discipline, is a really important aspect of analyzing history and the narratives that were often bestowed. And it's really important to not take those narratives for granted and rather carve out your own sort of narratives and see the threads that begin to unravel. So that's kind of a long-winded way. I hope I answered your question, but it was a really good one. So thank you.
No, thank you so much. That was really helpful.
Okay, so before I let Caitlin in, I just want to alert you, there's a comment from Joe Cacese, who just presented about about intellectual history, and I really enjoy hearing students talking across specializations like this, and how these conversations can be had within the program. So, Caitlin.
Hi. It was really good to hear this talk. I'm very likely to come into the University of Michigan as a South Asian Studies specialist. So I'm glad to finally, interact with somebody who is also studying this. I see that there aren't too many of us, so that's really cool. So I have a couple questions, and the first one is about source material. So in your talk, you mentioned constructing a historiographical narrative that uses both scholarly and public discourses. And I see the ways that, some of these public discourses can be viewed mostly through, visual materials. But I was wondering, is it like, what exactly are those materials? Is it primarily developed using like pedagogies or modern era literatures, or like, nationalistically driven ones, or like newspapers and popular media? I'm just wondering what your angle is.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'm happy to see another South Asianist amongst us, and I'd be happy to continue the conversation after the talk as well. But in terms of what I mean and how I'm operationalizing public-facing discourse, I'm a little bit more narrowed in my approach, where I want to specifically look at what is the RSS, the organization, like what are the narratives that they're pushing out, and what are they saying? And this is this choice was brought on by various, in my review of the secondary sources that have been talking about how the RSS really is infiltrating, like, as an organization, these spaces of they're even infiltrating like villages and really helping to shape the local histories that form as a result. So, but like your intimation, I would say, is right. Like when the public discourse can really be anything. Like that is the nature of what discourse is. It can truly be anything. The film that came out last year, RRR, if you've heard of it, is like an example of like discourse that you could analyze in this particular example too. But my angle pretty much is just like I'd like to basically unravel what sort of narratival tropes are being pushed through so by the organization itself. And that's why I'm starting with like it's sort of a Cartesian perspective. Like I start with the chief ideologues and see what they say, and then see if those tropes that they repeat sort of track on to the rest of the sort of body of scholarship that this organization produces. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and it more or less, this and also Joe's previous comment kind of bleeds into my last question, and hopefully this can be answered just really quickly. And it is just, your thesis seems to bridge, or seems to have a lot of relevance, and is also in contention with the way that area studies tends to be taught across other regions. So I'm wondering, to what extent have you been able, just generally as a student, or have you seen co-advising across regions, not necessarily from the South Asia specialization in MIRS, but, across MIRS?
Yeah. So I've talked, that's one of the privileges of being in an area studies program, is just being able to be in conversation with so many different faculty on a particular issue. So I would say, South Asia is my case, but in this project, I'm really looking at theories of historiographical theory. And for that, I'm not particularly bound to the South Asian perspective, even though they've added a wealth of literature. So for example, I've been in conversation with Dr. Cassel here, and we've talked about the concept of garbology and the cult of the document that dominates a lot of historical research, where, people care if the only reason a history is verified is if there's like a document there. That came out of European history. I went to a symposium with Jeff Ely, who's who's actually a German historian. But actually his work really, and I read his book, A Crooked Line, and his book really opened my eyes to the historiographical debates that occur in the field of history. So like he talks about the social history turn, the cultural history turn. So I would say like, I think regions are important, and of course your case is important, but also when you start kind of theorizing your work and maybe abstracting it, you can really put it in conversation with any sort of discipline or any other region. I think that's what my like biggest sort of takeaway would be from that experience working in MIRS.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to the next speaker, but Mohammad, there's a question for you in the chat that you can answer. It's from Emma that you can answer.
Okay. Thank you.
So, right. So let's take the final speaker, who is Omar Masood. So Omar is a dual degree student, and he's pursuing the Islamic or the Global Islamic Studies specialization within MIRS, as well as a master's in public policy from the Ford School. Omar's work in the MIRS program has concentrated on early Islamic history and refugee history. In his time at Michigan, he has received multiple fellowships, a Global Islamic Studies Center graduate fellowship, and was awarded a Fulbright U.S. student fellowship. So please join me in welcoming Omar for this final presentation.
Hey everyone, hope everyone's having a nice Friday. Ramadan Kareem to anyone who's celebrating it. So my talk is going to be much less structured than everyone else's. They're all very impressive. And I just kind of wanted to summarize the 3 years that I've spent as a MIRS student. And I think my talk is a little bit different just because Islamic Studies is technically the only non-area region studies, because, for example, the thesis I'm working on, it's looking at how South Asian religion impacts early Islam. And so literally right next to me, I've got a book on Buddhism, I've got a book on Jainism, and then I've got a book on Manichaeanism. And so that's really fun for me because I get to learn a lot of new stuff, and I'm not, stuck in one part of the world. And just some more background on me, what I've done since I've been at MIRS. I'm a GSI right now for the Department of Org Studies, and I'm a research assistant for the law school. And I've been able to give a couple presentations at conference. I presented 2 papers at conferences, and I'll present the same paper again in April at another conference in Montreal. But what I wanted to talk about here is not academics, because I think some of the best experiences I've had at MIRS are completely outside of the classroom, and just made possible by the resources available to students. So I'm going to talk about some language study I've done, some internships, and then what I did over spring break, which was not MIRS affiliated in any way, but it really it helped shape my understanding as a public policy and Islamic studies student. So if we can go to the next slide. So when I started here at Michigan, it was, COVID times. We were not doing classes in person. So after that first year, I was kind of like, I need to get out of here. I need to, be somewhere where I can just kind of be outside. And I'm obviously Islamic studies. And I've been studying Arabic for a while. So I thought, let's go to Jordan. Seems like I've always wanted to go, and it seems like a great time to do so. So what I did is I enrolled at a language study program in Amman called the Sijal Institute. And if you're familiar with Amman, they're right in the middle, Jebel Amman. And I was in a 3-month program. It met 4 or 5 days a week for about half a day. But obviously, how do I get to Jordan? I'm a grad student. I don't have that much in the bank right now. So I used a combination of funding to basically cover both the tuition of the program as well as the travel costs. So as a MIRS student, you get $1,000 for a travel grant. And then if you're in Islamic Studies or you're studying something related to Islamic Studies, there's a graduate fellowship. And then I applied to FLAS. And so a combination of those helped cover the expenses of the trip. And what's really cool is if you're someone who likes studying Arabic and you're interested in going to the Middle East, Jordan's a great place because they have all these different language institutes. So I did CJAL while at Michigan. And then before I came to Michigan that summer, before I did another program online called Cacese. But for both those programs, if you go to Jordan and you enroll as a student, they also help you get internships. So while I was in Jordan, I was both doing language study, but I also got to intern at a research think tank that was in the area. But honestly, the coolest part for me was being able to explore all of Jordan. So me and like people I met at this school, we would rent a car, every weekend, every other weekend, and we would just drive somewhere. So I think it's on the next slide. Oh yeah, sorry. The next slide, I talked through all this. But yeah, there's great coffee shops as well if you love people watching coffee shops while you work. But yeah, so I got to basically explore all of Jordan. These are just a couple of the places that I got to see. And overall, it was a great opportunity because it took me from, when I started at Michigan my first year, I was Arabic 201, 202. When I came back, I was, I think the last Arabic class I took was either 504 or 505, which, if you study Arabic, it gets way more fun once you're past the first couple of years. So yeah, it was a great opportunity, and it really helped develop both my understanding of the region as someone who's interested in, early Islamic history, which starts in this part of the world, but also as a public policy student who is interested in the current policies going on. So next slide. So then another thing I did kind of unconventional is I actually deferred this previous fall semester. So fall of 2020, I was not taking any courses. I wasn't doing anything related with the school because I got an internship with the Department of State. And this might not be everyone's method for applying to things, but usually when I apply to internships and stuff, I just apply and I forget about it. So this was one of those things. I applied to an internship at Department of State like in October. And then in May, I got an email, hey, congrats, you've been selected as an intern. So I kind of had to rework my entire game plan. I work with Charlie and Tina to kind of see what are my options here. And then like the academic advisor at Ford, like, hey, I've got this internship for the fall. Department of State seems pretty cool. What can we do? So everyone was really helpful. I'll talk about it a bit more in the next slide, but just logistically, I was able to make it work. And what's really cool is starting with like my cohort, Department of State is now paying their interns and providing them with housing. So obviously it's a government internship, pays not great, but the fact that you're in DC, you don't have to worry about paying for housing, you have some type of a salary, it's a game changer. So if you're at all interested in foreign policy, diplomacy, any of that stuff, put in an application. They've got fall, spring, and summer internships. You can defer if you want to, and we can talk about the nitty gritty of the internship on the next slide. So yeah, I want this to also be very honest about what my experience was like. So some good things, if you're not familiar with what government work is like I mentioned, pay. You're getting paid and you're given some form of housing, which is great because DC is super expensive. If we have $9 eggs here, they're $15 in DC. You get a security clearance temporarily. And so for those who are interested in working at the government, a security clearance is basically like you've got a third degree on your resume because these things take forever to come through. And because of the internship, unfortunately, like mine lapsed with the end of the internship. But now on my resume, I can put I've gone through that process, and that's kind of like a check in my box. You know, people know, oh, Omar can go through this process and we don't have to worry about, you know, any red flags in his past. You get to network. So because I'm also a student at the Ford School, I had to do an internship over the summer as part of their degree requirements. So I interned at Thomson Reuters, and my boss over the summer, she was amazing. And so I was really glad that I was able to stay in DC and just keep in contact with her, because while I've been searching for a job, because, you know, inshallah, I'll be graduating in April, she's been an amazing person. And so the ugly I want to talk about is I did defer, and I put my course load for every semester in the bottom, just so you know that if you're doing a dual degree, which is 36 MIRS, 48 for Ford, you're not going to have a lot of free time on the semester that you're at school. But if it's something that you think is worth your time, I say go for it. And like, keep in mind, like, this is my course load, and I also have been at GSI multiple semesters and worked. And so it is doable. The housing was a hotel where I shared, and my roommate snored a lot, but I'm running out of time. So we'll go to my last experience, which was also super cool. Yeah, so this spring I got to go to Palestine, which was amazing, because Palestine, I have to say, is the one place, no matter how much I read about it, no matter how much I studied about it, it could not prepare me for what going to Palestine is actually like. So I think there's next slide. Yeah, so basically there wasn't a lot of funding here because Palestine's contentious, and it's hard to get people to put their money behind it when we're a formal academic institution. But if we go to the last slide, I can talk about what I did. So basically what we did is we went all over the country, both in the occupied territories and Palestinian cities in Israel. And you just got to see what it was like to live under apartheid. And especially, you know, I'm Pakistani Indian, but I look Arab depending on how my hair is. And so you really feel what it's like to live under that apartheid. You know, I was 2 steps away from IDF soldiers. And if you are someone who wants to work in policy, or you just want to understand the current political situation in the Middle East, and Palestine is something you're passionate about, you've got to go. Palatrek is the trip. It happens once a year. This was the first year in Michigan, and I kind of just went on a whim, and it was a really great experience. And yeah, like, I'm not plugging the trip, don't feel forced, but it's still like on my mind, of course, because we just had spring break. But and this is a UB minbar that's in Hebron Mosque, and I have exceeded my time, so we can go to the next slide, which is just my email if you want to reach out for questions. But yeah, thank you for letting me word vomit for 9 minutes.
No. I rushed things a little bit in the middle, so we do have time and for questions to you, or just general questions among the panelists. Just before I let people ask questions, just want to show I was doing Arabic as a undergrad, and I used Haywood and Ahmad's grammar, which is just here in my bookshelf. So when anyways, I've done things other than Chinese studies. So yeah, thank you so much. And one thing I just want to say about all presenters is I really like the way you connect yourself and your research to the program, and show the strengths of the program. So yeah, so are the questions for Omar? We have one. Maybe I should just read it aloud. It's from Michelle Moore, if you allow me. So she asks, what did your typical day as an intern at the department, at the DOS look like? What type of work did they have you do?
All right. So this is what I'll say is the way that you're placed within the Department of State is based on the cover letter you submit. But there's a central HR of the Department of State, and then there's all these different bureaus. So this is just me being honest. The bureau I was assigned to was not told I was coming until the day I got there. So where you are placed within State Department really shaped your experience. So for example, my experience, I sat at my desk for 8 hours a day reading for my thesis because they didn't have work for me. My roommate, on the other hand, had a great experience. His boss was engaged, took him out to lunch, showed him the ropes, really, included him in all the processes that go behind being a State Department employee. So I don't want to color your perception by just my experience because, to be honest, I was bored out of my mind. But it is very dependent on where you end up. So because I have an interest in refugees, I was placed in the Bureau of Population, Refugees and Migration, but there's a bunch of different places within the State Department. So just be prepared, I guess, and to be completely pragmatic, having State Department on your resume might be worth it to just sit for 3 months and use your free time to do something productive. But yeah, I had a middle of the ground experience is what I'd say. I did not do much.
Okay. Yeah, I worked myself as a clerk at the embassy. So I had back in the 90s in Beijing. So I had some, I wouldn't say diplomatic expertise, but hanging out with similar career track people. How I wished I had been able to take an MPP back then. Anyway, so are there more questions or comments either in the chat room or yes? So we have Kenna. You wanna?
Yeah. So you said you went to Palestine for spring break this summer, and I just want to ask, was the process of getting there easy or anything? I was supposed to go this summer, but due to security concerns, my trip got canceled.
I mean, so to be honest, the timing of when our spring break was the same exact time as the settler violence in Hawara. So this is my not MIRS affiliated advice, totally just Omar's candid opinion. It's Palestine. There's never going to be a secure time to go with the way the situation is. But I would recommend if you can find an organization like Paltrek that coordinates a lot of that for you, it makes it so much easier, because if I went on my own, it would not have ended up the same way. Like I'm hapless when it comes to travel. So I would definitely recommend, like it wasn't easy because I look like this. My name's Omar bin Masood. But because I was in a group, we had a mix of, Arab Muslim looking students and Arab Muslim looking students. So that kind of helps you get through security and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I'd definitely recommend going with the group.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there more questions or comments? Sounds that you had a very rich experience these 3 years, both in terms of travel and being on location in DC.
Yeah, I just tried to do everything I could in 3 years. 3 years, I thought I'd be here for 2 years. I didn't even plan to do the dual degree, so yeah.
Yeah. Emma?
Yeah, so my question for you, Omar, do you think you would have sought out some of these extra experiences had you not been like pursuing that dual degree for public policy? Like, do you think you would have had some of the same interests?
So like, I guess because when I came to the program, I was kind of two minds of what I wanted to do, because I love school. The reason I take like 18 to 20 credits every semester is because I just want to take every single class that seems cool. And so I think even without the dual degree, I still would have done most of what I did. Maybe I wouldn't have done the State Department internship because it would have, gotten in the way of, it could have gotten in the way of graduation or something like that. But just like for me personally, I actually came into just MIRS Islamic Studies and I applied to Ford after my first year here. So yeah, like that my kind of mindset since I started is just do everything I can. That seems cool. And funding is out there. You just really have to know how to look for it and ask for it, which is like a skill I've developed over time. So in the 3 years I've been here, I've applied to so many things I can't even remember. Like kind of like Fulbright, which I just said no to because I got the state internship. I also applied to the Boren Fellowship, but I didn't get that. I was like a semi-finalist. But there's a lot of opportunities for money inside and outside of Michigan. So it might be too late for everyone now, but the State Department does have 2 fellowships to pay for grad school that people should be aware of.
Okay. Right. So we had 2 stories about internships. We had one from Joe Cacese a little bit earlier, and also the combination with language studies. So just to highlight how the panelists connect with each other. So we're kind of, we're at the end. I think we're sort of had a little bit extra time. I just wanted to say, so here we have Joshua Girgiri has a question. I will read it aloud from the chat room. So he says, that's a great presentation. I love the fact that you took every little opportunity to tour and find answers to your curiosity. How was it like to pursue a dual degree? And did you incorporate your experiences and academic pursuit?
So don't tell the Ford School, but I actually don't like public policy. There's just certain parts of it which I think will help. Like, it was a very pragmatic choice to do public policy because I wanted to get into the government, and I thought if I've got Islamic Studies / I can market it as Middle East Studies, and I've got public policy, boom, I'm a Middle East policy expert. So how is it like? It's been nice. I definitely prefer Islamic Studies more just because the courses are more fun, and having to take statistics and like macro econ aren't my favorite thing. But I think it's made me it just gives me a broader perspective on how different people think about things. And, we're coming up on, we just passed the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War. Hearing what it's like from the policy side versus, what you hear in like the Middle East Studies department, it's jarring to say the least. And you can definitely understand why America made some policy decisions it made, because you don't have this intersectional expertise. And then did I incorporate it in my experiences in academic pursuit? I don't know that I did. You definitely can. I didn't, because I'm doing a thesis completely unconnected to policy, because studying about early Islam is much more more fun for me than if I were to kind of force a policy and Islamic studies question together. But if that's something you're interested in, obviously studying the Middle East right now is super interesting as well. So you definitely could, do a MPH, MPP, even a informatics degree. There's a lot of flexibility in what you can do and how you can mix MIRS with other stuff.
I muted myself. So Michelle said, for anyone that received FLAS, the FLAS fellowship specifies that you need to state any intentions to go abroad in your application's personal statement. Is there any way around this, or were you able to properly plan ahead for any academic trips abroad during your application? So I think that was for you, Omar. There's a question in the chat room.
Yeah, so I got academic year FLAS and the summer FLAS, and so there's not any way around it, but I guess, Michelle, if you could add a bit more context as to what your concerns are, because actually, it was a concern during COVID, but it shouldn't be anymore, I think, because I remember when I was trying to go to Jordan, there was some like stuff to work out between, like, with the government funding trips to a COVID country. But yeah, I don't know, Michelle, if you want to add some more context, I could probably answer.
Okay. Right, that was sort of my concern. It seems like it could be based on decisions that are still arbitrarily dependent on funding or acceptance. That's the clarification from Michelle. Yeah, well, I think we have Omar's email address in the chat room, so you can also go on a separate chat if you guys want to. I think I want to wrap up. I think that's about time. I think we had a couple of really rich, empirically rich and theoretically rich presentations from several different subplans. And I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today in the II Graduate Student Lightning Talks. It's the second time I'm chairing this. I hope you enjoyed learning about the interesting works our students have undertaken. I know I'm always amazed to hear how bright and accomplished you are. And I want to thank all the speakers for sharing about your experiences. And please join me in one last virtual round of applause. Let's see if I can use my reaction function here. Yes, things are, everything is electronic now. Give me a second. So this concludes the event. I know that you who are visiting students, there might be one or few more items on your itineraries. And I hope that you will enjoy the rest of your virtual visit. And please let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, you have a wonderful weekend, everyone. I'm just going to type my email address in the chat room if people want to ask me anything. But otherwise, other than that, have a nice weekend, and I hope to see you around, and I hope to see you in the fall when we do this physically in person at the top floor of Weiser Hall.